Military people of Reddit. Who was the how the fuck did he pass basic training guy? This guy was a student in aviation school while I was an instructor. He was a new soldier attending his technical school after basic. Apparently he was on the autism spectrum, but functioned well enough for the army. He was great at physical tasks. That's how he passed basic. He was also very intelligent in the classroom study. If he was directly instructed he was fine. One day I found him in the hall between classrooms during a class session. He had taken a restroom break, but got sidetracked and was staring deeply into the ceiling fan. It took several attempts to get his attention. I had to touch his arm when he didn't respond to my approach or calling his name a few times. It happened a few times with other instructors until our supervisor addressed it with the division chief. It was decided after several medical consultations and meetings with the colonel that it wasn't safe to allow this student to proceed as a helicopter mechanic. It was ultimately a safety matter because he could get mesmerized by a spinning rotor on an airfield. Strangely, I saw him later on a deployment to Afghanistan. He was reclassified as an artillery soldier. Worked with a USAF major long ago who'd been in grade for Ians because he couldn't give a briefing without scratching his balls. Only the Vietnam War was keeping him in the service. Eventually he went on an orientation tour of a Minuteman site and fell into a hole. When he got out of the hospital they retired him. You find officers like this too. Not lacking basic competencies. Just common sense. We had a water leak at the Naval Medical Center and the department head, 06, simply kicked off her shoes so they wouldn't get wet. Part of the ceiling in the space had collapsed and the computer tower was sitting on the floor in the puddle along with her feet. It and the outlet was throwing sparks and you could see the blue light of arcing electricity inside the tower. Didn't stop working until the first ID3 got there to point it out. You could feel the electricity in that room. At basic, we had a guy who did a version of the Christian Bale deep Batman voice for the entire time and never took off his eye protection, terrifying to be woken up by him for guard duty in the middle of the night. He would just loom over you and say your name while jabbing you violently with his hands. Apparently, his underwear eventually fused to his body because he didn't shower for weeks. The stench was miserable. From what I heard, he was put on suicide watch a couple of weeks after basic, but he passed basic. They didn't force him to shower. I figured the military would be one of those places where politeness was overruled by public health hazards. They do. Source had to visibly make sure a guy showered in basic. Anyone who ever lost a weapon in the field, I've seen it happen a couple of times. You feel sorry them because of the consequences they have to face. But at the same time they totally deserve it for the hell they brought upon the whole unit lol. First hand experience here. Had a dude lose his NVGs, night vision goggles, during a training exercise. It was this huge thing. Lots of moving and running and changing positions. We finally get done around midnight. Sarge has us lined up checking our gear. Gets to airhead. Where the hell are your nods? And then the dreaded words echoed into the night. I don't know. Cut to us 4.5 hours later. Combing through the woods of feet. Drum. Somebody sees a green glow coming from a pile of leaves. Dude lost his whole setup running through the woods. Rhino mount. Base plate. All of it, and either one, didn't notice he now couldn't see, and his helmet was a ton lighter. Or two, was a fucking idiot. He eventually had all his gear 5 to 50 corded to himself. Looked like Tangela. Honestly, it was me. Joined the Marines at 17 as an artilleryman. Didn't know at the time that I had high functioning autism. I could follow instructions well enough, so I got through basic without any real trouble. But I just didn't have much common sense in my head at the time. I didn't like to socialize and was very awkward beyond simple order following things. I got messed with to no end and wound up beating the snot out of myself from the stress during Fleet Week. Eventually we got deployed to Iraq as civil affairs, and I was put in administrative and office duties and found I was especially good at office work. In the end, it was a positive experience though. I was forced into having a lot more social interactions than I would have as a civilian, and I was able to work on things like that a lot more than I would have if I had not joined. I still had a lot of trouble after leaving the Marines because it was right at the start of the recession. but I would have been even worse off otherwise. There was a guy next to me on the shooting range. We were supposed to fire a full mag at the target. 29 rounds. Well, when we were done his target had 0 hits, and mine had around 50. Oh, I'm still pissed about that one. I hit damn near perfect on the paper targets, even with my rifle recoil slamming into my safety glasses. No unit was ever given me the correct helmet or insert, so my helmets have to sit on my safety glasses, which also have the corrective inserts, and the recoils into the glasses and then into my nose. It's a mess to explain, but I always end up with the bridge of my nose black and blue. I hit perfectly on that range though. The dumbest woman next to me fired and got confused about which target was hers towards the end. She put 10 rounds in my target, had the other 30 rounds on hers. My target had a total of 50 rounds, so 10 were hers and the other 40 were mine. They made me refire, but by then I had a massive section of my glasses chipped out from the recoil and I couldn't see the damn target anymore about halfway through firing. The lad who shat himself and didn't want to let people know, so threw his shitty kit with an actual log inside the trousers into the group wash. Fucking rotter. The 2 females and 2 males who got caught fraternizing in the briefing room the night before pass out and somehow managed to not get day 0' for it. The lad who tried to give himself a neck shave and bust a racing stripe 5 inches up the back of his head. The lad who broke his nose trying to impress NCOs with a backflip. The lad who was going for gunner who couldn't for the life of him figure out how to sling a rifle. Spent 5 hours practicing, crying and shit. Couldn't hack it, and after passing out eventually months after everyone else, got kicked out for drugs. Sold equipment including his gas mask, tac vest and helmet. Started fights with fellow recruits almost every week, threatened to bring his gang to shoot us up. Still passed. Go figure. Edit. For those curious, I don't think he ever passed his trade course, and I'm fairly certain he got kicked out or released before the year was up. He wanted to bring a street gang to attack a military installation. Yes, actually, we had a big gang briefing the next day. Never confirmed if he was actually in a gang, but he threatened it enough. Getting immunization needles. I overheard the nurse asking about medical family history. My family has a history of hypothermia during field training with blank grounds. Had 2 negligent discharges. Ended up being charged for both. Threw their rifle down and starting casing black magic on the rifle. If he was referring to malignant hypothermia, that's a very real, very serious issue. F/US Army here. Thankfully my story didn't make it out of basic, but damn, I would like to punch the recruiter that put her in square in the jaw. This girl was 5 feet 2 and probably weighed less than 90 lbs. She was so frail she looked like she was going to snap under the weight. If a lunch tray, she was given twice as much time to eat and twice as much food as the rest of us in an effort to put some weight on her. She never ate it, just poked it for 20 minutes then threw it away. She was clearly developmentally disabled. Soldiers call each other retarded all the time as a joking insult. This wasn't the case. She was actually developmentally disabled. During reception, 1 to 2 weeks of in-processing before actual basic training starts, I had to teach her how to button her pants, lace her boots, and do her laundry. She was young, maybe 18. Her boyfriend was over 40. In reception, she would be on the phone with him every walking moment possible. She was caught on multiple occasions furiously masturbating in the corner of the bay while on the phone with him. She couldn't understand that it was inappropriate. Once we shipped to actual training, she ended up in my company, but a different training platoon than me. She made it 4 weeks before they took her weapon away because she wouldn't stop flagging people, accidentally aiming it at someone with it. Also, she could barely hold it up. The 9-pound M16A2 was too heavy for her. She got moved to the separation company around week 5. Never saw her again. That was 9 years ago. I think about her sometimes and wonder if she's okay. Had a kid at my first squadron, Air Force, who was quite possibly one of the dumbest, least self-aware people I've ever met. This kid either couldn't or wouldn't retain basic information, which was problematic given that he was in the intelligence career field. At one point he was presenting a briefing about North Korea and claimed with a straight face that the capital city of North Korea was Bogota. For those keeping score, Bogota is the capital of Colombia. He tried very hard to project a redneck persona, and as part of this bought a massive bright red lifted truck with obnoxious redneck decal work. Anyone with half a brain could tell you he was struggling to pay for it on his measly E3 barracks rat pay. Eventually he decided he didn't want to pay for the truck anymore, so he drove it into a lake one night and filed an insurance claim, then used the money to immediately buy a different vehicle. This was quickly uncovered by the police, and he was kicked out of the Air Force. To this day I have no earthly idea who thought this kid belonged in military intelligence, or how he got through intel school. Had a girl who would hit herself in the face when she got upset, like full hard slaps. It was unnerving to watch. She's also hide candy and food from the mess deck and eat it alone in the head. Bathroom. Our racks, beds, were next to each other, separated by a thin piece of metal with small holes punched in it for air circulation. One night I was reading a book and she asked me how I liked it. I asked her how she knew what I was reading, and she said she was watching me through the holes in the partition. This girl made it through the recruiter, MEPS, where they do a psych eval, and boot camp. Clearly someone dropped the ball. There was this super nasty dude in our platoon that smelled terrible, and the squad leader figured out it's because he washed his clothes by putting them in the freezer overnight. He also got busted malingering by purposely not hydrating in the desert heat, passing out, and having to get fourths from the medics. He did it to get out of work. Eventually they did a home health and wellness check off base and found 12 dogs living in his 2-bedroom apartment and the floor thick as carpet with dog shit. All he was a 35 series intelligence. Some scout from a cav company that I was attached to as intel support somehow always showed up when I was washing my feet. My feet got so gross in the desert and baby wipes didn't cut it. One day he got the courage to approach me from around a sand dune and asked where I'm from. I said, Iowa. He said, isn't that in Nebraska? Also a woman I was in basic training with who had to have been on the spectrum. We had to teach her and coach her on how to shower. Otherwise she just stood under the water for 30 seconds. She fell asleep while live firing on the qualification range. A lot of us complained to RPG because we would wake up with her staring at us from the end of our bunks, crouched down like a fucking animal. That's all I remember now. But she graduated. I wonder what happened to her. Hope she's okay. I've had the pleasure of serving with a few of those types. The two most memorable are, went through basic with this kid. This dude had literally never a day in his life prior done anything physical, ever. He had a permanent hunchback from sitting on the couch all his life. He was literally purple because his circulation sucked. His arms had the bat wings of an 80-year-old woman. And he honest to God had a wattle, which led to his unfortunate nickname of Turkey. He legitimately couldn't do 5 push-ups, a single sit-up. This dude couldn't even jump high enough to grab onto a pull-up bar, let alone do a pull-up. Failed every single PT test we took. The drills actually called his mother, and the army paid for her to fly out so she could give encouragement so maybe he would finally pass one. Home Slice still graduated with us because the drills couldn't be asked to chapter him and wanted his gaining unit to take the flak instead. Second dude was a real special case. 100% a Goma pile type of situation. Only a few peanuts rattling around the can. He got to us right around the same time as What Does the Fox Say was a big deal. He considered it his favorite song and sang it nearly constantly. He honest to God thought he was a cat and would lick himself / randomly meow at us. Dude was white as shit, but every other week he'd be ripping a different gang. Typically one that doesn't recruit white folk. His favorite was Latin Kings. I think he just liked yellow. We'd catch him staring at walls and shit. Completely zoned out. We got orders to deploy, and nobody wanted him with us. But sadly he came along. Leadership took his firing pin, and he guarded the DFAC for the whole deployment. As soon as we got back he was chaptered for mental instability. A few of my guys are still Facebook friends with him, and according to him, he was fucking John Rambo himself overseas, single-handedly clearing buildings and shit. Army guy here. I went to basic with this one guy. OML. Let's start from the top. Almost shot a drill sergeant. Got a staph infection and refused to get medicine. Slept in his wall locker during toe the line. Toe the line is when you stand right by your bunks quiet at the position of attention and wait for your drill sergeant. Would listen to the DS explain what you would have to do, and the DS would ask if there was any questions and not ask at that time, but then 5 minutes later ask him a dumbass question. Oh my god, all of them. I was part of the Cardiff 8 technical school considered part 2 of basic, and I had to file a lot of paperwork for my dumbasses. Here's a highlight reel. One of my guys ran into a pole and broke his face. Twice. On the same pole. The ink hadn't even dried on the first report before he did it the second time. Somehow a rumor started that if you could put your PT belt on a dig you'd be exempt from PT. There was an entire week where we had to keep soldiers from sneaking out the barracks with excessive number of PT belts, except we hadn't figured out why yet. Then by some sick twist of fate a deer actually ran throughout morning formation. Like, through it, and it was just a hailstorm of PT belts at the poor thing. I had one get all the way through the training, just to discover the week before he graduated that he was at the wrong 8. He was supposed to be learning a completely different specialty. I didn't even know that could happen. Health and welfare inspections are always a nightmare. None of these chuckleheads do laundry half as often as they should, and half don't do it at all. Then there's the really gross finds, like bags of used sanitary products that they can't find the motivation to walk 100 yards to the dumpsters for. A hurricane came through 1 month and there was a conspiracy to jump off the barracks with makeshift parachutes. We successfully prevented that incident and Wolder got away without filing paperwork if one of them hadn't bragged about it while raking leaves at BN. 1. I shit you not, could not spell his own name. A lot come through not knowing cursive, and I figured that was the reason he was having trouble, so I said he could print on the dotted line. Motherfucker misspelled his own name. Then there was the butt plug incident. Honestly, the less said, the better. This isn't including the petty high school bullshit these brats get up to, he said. She said. Start a fight to defend MY on a SRNT. The straight up crimes that happen, usually involving alcohol or smuggled fried chicken and general tomfoolery, losing important equipment. You'd think this be a reason to fear for our military's capabilities, right? Nope. I would not unleash those terrors on anyone except our worst enemies. Lord have mercy on them. Cause these shitlords can't even spell the word. First night of actual basic. After shark attack and all that BS. We're all showering and getting ready for bed. I noticed a guy in the bunk across from me had already changed into his PTs. I asked him if he was gonna shower and he said, no. I put on 48-hour deodorant. The entire bay erupted into laughter, and for the rest of basic, my guy's name was Private 48. Kind of a badass name. Also sounds like a retarded knockoff of Soldier. 76. After basic training I was at tech school in a squadron that trains air traffic controllers, airfield managers, command post, and area space control and warning systems. Had 3 people I wonder get past basic. 1. The person who tossed a whole unopened box of Hot Pockets into a microwave, set it for 5 minutes, and left their dorm. 2. The person who got 2nd-degree burns when they tried to iron their uniform while wearing it. 3. The girl who would hiccup, sounded like she was trying to imitate a raptor from Jurassic Park in formation, or whenever people weren't paying attention to her. At one of my duty stations there was a girl that wasn't all there. One day, out of the blue, she decides to take the 3-wheel bike, the one with the large basket in between the 2 rear tires, and go for a spin. She hit a fence post, a parked car and a dumpster, all within 30 feet of her starting position. She eventually went to cook school. Oh, there have been so many of these. Let's see, first was Sergeant Stubby. On aircraft we have these things called binaxial fans. Think of a high amperage DC powered fan with blades that are about 2mm thick. These things usually have a tubular housing for air channeling reasons and spin so fast they are near invisible. For whatever reason he decided to check if it was spinning and stuck his hand down the backside of one of these things and stick a finger in. The end result was a clean severance at the first knuckle. I watched this same guy fall asleep on the wing of an Apache while trying to install a clamp on a drain line and roll forward off the wing. He hit the hellfire rack on the way down, which broke his fall and his arm. The next guy was a career SPC. If I remember correctly, he was at 8 years in when I met him. He was probably somewhere on the spectrum, but that was before autism was really in the mainstream, so most people thought he was high on chromosomes. He was horrible at coping with stressors and would high side on the regular. He came in one day and had a grey undershirt on back when they were supposed to be brown. I asked him if he was wearing a part shirt underneath his top, to which he excitedly declared of course not. At that point I told him to look down, which he did. Then in the span of about 2 seconds grabbed both sides of his collar, zips his hands and collars tight across his neck, and then without a word runs full speed for the door. He clips the door frame and eats it outside and then disappears for about an hour and shows back up with a brown shirt and no recollection of anything ever happening. About 3 weeks later, he shows up to work, and during morning uniform inspection I get to him and notice he is wearing 2 left boots. He didn't even notice he had 2 left boots. Fast forward a couple more weeks and I'm walking with him out to a helicopter and he is carrying a torque wrench. Evidently his hand stops working like a normal hand and this torque wrench slips right out of his fingers, hits his boot, and gets punted about 40 feet down the flight line. These are calibrated tools, so if they drop more than a foot they are supposed to get coded out and sent back for ecal. He just walks his happy ass up to it, looks at me and stares at me while he picks the wrench up and then starts sauntering back out towards the aircraft. I call him on it and he is dead ass bewildered that he will be told to go get a new torque wrench. For every quality dude, there is someone equally horrible and no one seems quite sure how he/she got there. We basically had a Goma from Full Metal Jacket who during a few times in basic training I was actually concerned was going to murder all of us from the abuse he received. I, similarly to Joker, was assigned to unfuck this recruit, which unfortunately I was unable to do regardless of the instruction, advice or positive reinforcement offered. I'm convinced he was mentally unable to handle what was going on. He still contacts me about once a year 14 years later. I had a dude like that too. He made it to the unit, so I tried to help him. He was getting abused by other soldiers too, though. He eventually snapped at home and hit his own mother. Ended up in jail, then mental health treatment. A JAG investigation came calling to the unit and ended a bunch of careers. One of my biggest personal failings as a man and mentor, that I didn't intervene on the abuse. Should have never came to the violence in his own home, on his own family. The people doing the abusing got what they deserved, though. No remorse about them.